those of you who know my sort of something about my work history and my history of activism in the community know about my recent departure from the employment of BC Ferries. But as I often find myself, there's a silver lining in every cloud, and the silver lining was that I managed to latch employment at Greyline, driving big buses like that one that was just parked over here, and the one that's still probably parked over there on the street. Those big double-decker buses, and then we do this little route around the city. But I always remember to point out, not only I try as often as possible to point out this monument, but also the Netherlands Carillon Tower that sits over there on just by the museum, which is was a gift to the Canadian people from the people of the Netherlands as a thank you for Canada's role in liberating Holland in 1945. And I always remembered, and I always try to mention it, that my father was one of those soldiers that liberated Holland in 1945, and that my mother was one of the citizens of Holland. One of the things that my mother always left me with was my sense of music. I got the music from my mother's side. Last night I had the strangest dream I ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. I dreamed I saw a mighty room filled with women and men, and the paper they were signing said they'd never fight again. And when that paper was all signed and 1,000,000 copies made, they joined their hands and bowed their heads, and grateful prayers they prayed. And the people in the streets below were dancing round and round, and swords and guns and uniforms were scattered on the ground. Last night I had the strangest dream I ever dreamed before. I dreamed the world had all agreed to put an end to war. Thank you.
I'm a child of immigrants, Jewish immigrants. My mother came from Poland. During the Second World War, she lost her sister, brother-in-law, and 4 children. We never heard from them again. I think it was one relative that came out of the Second World War alive. My father was German, and his parents just escaped Germany in 1938. They refused to believe that fascism was coming, and they left just in time. I can remember after the war, my mother searching the papers for names. Maybe her family was still alive. Searching, maybe one of the children might be alive. But they were extremely religious, and it was figured that they were probably one of the first to go in the Warsaw Ghetto. So it's just a little bit of something. And I think the reason I'm talking about this is the Strangest Dream song made me think about this, because that song was written, as you all know, by Ed McCurdy. It was written about a petition that was being circulated throughout the world to stop the onset of nuclear weapons. 6 million people around the world signed it. I can remember my parents, and this is when they became very active in the peace movement and stayed it for the rest of their lives. They would stand on the streets getting people to sign the petition and getting a lot of harassment, but they felt it was extremely important to do this. And I can remember, going in with them and seeing them sign it. And one last thing I just want to say, a number of young people came over here after the Second World War, and I became friends with some of them through my Jewish groups. And I just want to tell about 2 girls. One of my girlfriends tried to commit suicide. She was a Holocaust survivor. The other, she was constantly washing her hands. She couldn't stop washing her hands. And I know this is part of from the war. So war is terrible.
Against war and the struggle for peace is essential. We also have to struggle against the economic system that makes war possible and that feeds the economic system that feeds off of war, that needs war to grow and needs war to consolidate its power over the world. And I think this ideological nature of war, it's always been remembered by the people in the traditions to which we belong. So 91 years ago, when the First World War ended, there was a large parade in Victoria. Most of the people were more in that, along that mentality, still loyal to the Canadian military, still loyal to the economic masters who had profited off the war and decided to go to war in the first place, and who had the blood of 66,000 Canadians on their hands. But there was a small group like this one, consisting of about 300 people, and they marched behind the red banner and tried to join the main parade, and they were kind of chased off the streets by the more mainstream group. But even then, in the very first Remembrance Day, which was a parade just 3 days after the carnage ended on the Western Front, there was a group of dissidents who were arguing, putting forward a different kind of memory, and a memory that drew a direct connection between the carnage in the battlefields and profiteering at home and the capitalist system. When this war was fought in Spain in 1936, communists in Victoria and across Canada again were drawing back to a different kind of memory, and they named their battalion after the leaders of the rebellions in Canada prior to Confederation. William Mackenzie was the leader of the rebellion in Upper Canada, which is today Ontario. He led a group that marched down Yonge Street armed in a challenge to the British Empire. They were dispersed and the British Empire held control. The bigger challenge was in Lower Canada, in present-day Quebec, where for a few years there was a pitched conflict between armed Canadiens, armed farmers, against British rule in that part of what is today Canada. And so the communists who decided to volunteer to go to Spain named their battalion after the leaders of this struggle 100 years earlier, talking about the links between the Anglophone and the Quebecois working class in Canada, and the need to always have a long-range view in any immediate social struggles. And also to put that question front and center, that war doesn't exist in the abstract, that the movement for peace doesn't exist in the abstract, that the only way to put an end to imperialist wars is to work for a different kind of economic system based on cooperation rather than greed and conquest.
I just want to speak a little bit about my grandpa. He's a little bit emotional for me. This is my first Remembrance Day where he's not around, but I usually send him an email or something, so this is kind of like a divine email, I suppose. But I just wanted to tell a story that really inspired me as a kid, where my grandpa was in the Second World War and he was building bridges, and so one of his friends got word in the same day that both of his brothers had passed away, and it was a really hard day for that man. And that night he was put in charge of a Nazi pilot and took out his grief and despair of losing his brothers on that soldier. And my grandpa was witnessing it, and my grandpa told him to just take the night off and pretty much save this man's life. And growing up, I assumed that Nazis were evil and, of course, like faceless and nameless, and they didn't. But with my grandpa telling me the story of how he saved this man's life and how grateful the man was, and the man gave my grandpa his belt, and it just really drove home for me that he's just a soldier like my grandpa. He was just put in this war the same way as everyone else. It's not their fight. And I just wanted to honor my grandpa on this day and honor everybody else that had to go through